Question number 8. The following text is adapted from Herman Melville's 1855 novel, Israel Potter. Israel is a young man wandering through New England during the late 18th century. He hired himself out for 3 months, at the end of that time, to receive for his wages 200 acres of land lying in New Hampshire. His employer proving false to the contract in the matter of the land, and there being no law in the country to force him to fulfill it, Israel, who, however brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon a pinch, seems nevertheless to have evinced throughout many parts of his career a singular patience and mildness, was obliged to look round for other means of livelihood than clearing out a farm for himself in the wilderness. So which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole? Is it A? It implies that Israel treasures a particular characteristic of his personality when that characteristic should usually be regarded as a flaw. B. It suggests that if not for a certain aspect of his character, Israel might not have been as easily thwarted in his ambition to establish a farm. C. To show why Israel would not have been able to undertake the enormous amount of labor necessary to run a farm even if he had owned the necessary property. Or D. It explains why, when the situation requires it, Israel is able to undertake courageous acts that others would generally avoid. So what we are looking for is, we have to describe the function of the underlined portion. The underlined portion which says, who, however brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon a pinch, but he is also having singular patience and mildness. So that means, which should we choose? If you said choice B, well done, that is the best answer. Choice B is the best answer because it describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole. So the text describes the failed attempt of Israel Potter to establish a farm in New England. So what has happened is that at the end of the time to receive his wages, which was 200 acres of land lying in New Hampshire, proving false the contract in the matter of the land. And there was also no law in the country to fulfill. Even though he is a daredevil, apparently, he has not been able to do anything against his employer. So, the text describes the failed attempt of Israel Potter to establish a farm in New England during the late 18th century. According to his contract, he was to receive 200 acres in exchange for 3 months' work. But his employer then refused to fulfill the bargain, and Israel had no recourse to law to obtain the land he was owed. Israel was therefore forced to find another means of supporting himself. So what he had to do? He was obliged to look around for other means of livelihood. And to explain why Israel was particularly susceptible to his employer's dishonesty is that the underlined portion states that though Israel was brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon a pinch, he also possessed a singular patience and mildness. So, in other words, Israel could be courageous in certain circumstances, but he was usually meek and disinclined to argument, from which it is reasonable to infer that Israel was often taken advantage of. So, thus the underlined portion suggests that if not for a certain aspect of his character, Israel might not have been as easily thwarted in his ambition to establish a farm. So because he is sometimes patient and mild, he was taken advantage of. So that is the main purpose of this underlined portion. And A is incorrect because although the underlined portion describes aspects of Israel's personality, it does not address how he feels about his own personality. So that is not what the underlined sentence is about. And C is incorrect because the underlined portion addresses Israel's occasional courage and frequent meekness, but does not address whether he would have skills and resolve necessary to operate a farm if he owned sufficient property. So we don't know that from the given text, if he had owned necessary property, whether he can run a farm or not. And D is also incorrect. Though the underlined portion does indicate that Israel could be courageous in certain circumstances, it does not say that he undertook acts of courage that others avoided, but rather that he was habitually meek. Even if the underlined portion did say that Israel was more courageous than most, this would not explain why he found himself under the circumstances described in the text, that is, as a consequence of his meek nature, cheated of the property to which he had a right. So B is the best answer. Hope that's clear.